Innovation and creativity are central to entrepreneurship. But what happens when you go beyond the edge? The Frontier Entrepreneurship Podcast brings you the world's first, the disruptive, the avant-garde. We take you to the frontier in conversation with the entrepreneurs who are the forerunners of the industries of the future. Get to know their world with co-hosts Braden Kemp and Tracy Morningstar. A Canadian entrepreneur is creating eco-friendly, non-woven fabrics from natural fibers such as hemp, wheat, and flax. Award-winning innovator Dr. Morgan Wyatt shows us a path through the fields to a more circular, sustainable world. Today, we set out on a journey to an industrial landscape transformed with Dr. Wyatt, co-founder of Advanced Biofibre Technologies.
Welcome to the Frontier Entrepreneurship Podcast. I'm Braden Kemp. I'm here with my co-host, Tracy Morningstar.
Hello, Braden.
And today we're taking you to the frontier of sustainability with Morgan Wyatt, founder of Advanced Biofibre and Botanical Symbiotics, as well as some other really interesting ventures that we'll dig into. Morgan, it's great to chat with you again and welcome.
Thanks a lot, Braden. And thanks, Tracy, for having me here.
So, Morgan, normally we are kind of focusing in on a founder and their company, but I know you've got a whole bunch of things going on, more than one in the realm of sustainable materials and sustainability. So maybe before we get into the specifics about Advanced Biofibre and Botanical Symbiotics, it might be helpful to talk about your background a bit with Greenlid. Can you kind of tell us the Greenlid story?
Yeah, I guess I can. I started off, I think, in science, like in university, and ended up continue on doing my PhD actually in chemical biology. So I'm like a science nerd at heart, and really actually studied nothing to do with what I went into. So a lot of times people thought, oh, like you carried on something from your studies, but I was actually in pharmaceutical drug discovery from natural sources, which does come up in a lot of different ways, but trying to find organisms like fungi or bacteria that produce like anti-cancer, antibacterials by looking at their genomes and then purifying out those molecules. And then I did pretty well there and was going to go off and do a postdoc, and kind of made a little bit of a right turn and thought way back in the day that it was a time when the green bin system was starting to be rolled out everywhere and garbage was starting to be picked up every other day. And we were dealing with those compostable plastic bags that like still are existent today, but always found that they leaked and didn't really do the right job. And got into finding, there must be a better way type scenario, and thought we could use some more natural materials rather than even these compostable plastics to make it easier. And so that was kind of the genesis with Greenlid. My brother and I founded the company. Essentially what it started was a KFC bucket made out of egg carton material that we had a natural kind of fatty acid chemistry built into it that made it leak proof. So you could fill it up and then compost this entire thing in the compost and not have to deal with those messy plastic bags. And I would say that we were on not just the cutting edge, but the bleeding edge of that kind of thing. Because I think the tricky part in, environmental or sustainable companies is, at the end of the day, consumers also have like a price consciousness about them that everyone says are environmental until they make a decision at the grocery store shelves. But we learned a lot about the whole system in waste management, speaking to probably every facility around, and started to realize that there were some issues in what we were considering compostable. So there's a lot of people hang their hats on a lot of things where certified compostable is, and a lot of these other kind of certifications. And we realized that the compost facilities never really had too much to say about those certifications, and they were invented and brought to the government and retailers by the chemical companies who invented compostable plastics. And so we stayed away from compostable plastics throughout. And lo and behold, about a decade after this, pretty much no compostable plastics are allowed anywhere. And so there was a big push back then to use compostable straws and compostable plastic cutlery. And we just knew that from a practical point of view, you can't tell the difference optically, and these things are all sorted optically. And unless it's perfect conditions, they don't compost. So they all get sorted out. And so we were one of the first ones to really bring some birch style cutlery to the market, and wheat drinking straws. And another aspect outside of the compost bin stuff is I'd realized back then that our formulation wasn't totally grease proof, and some of the manufacturers suggested that we add this chemical to it to make it grease proof because everybody did it. And I saw the chemical structure, and it had a whole bunch of fluorines on a long carbon chain, and this is what we now know as PFAs, or it's really common. And so about probably 5 years ago, I was able to develop and bring some technology that allowed us to make all the plates and bowls in this molded fiber without it. And because essentially these are cancer-causing chemicals that we were putting into all the molded fiber and these good for you, like compostable things, and we're just actually eating off of these things, and went to a lot of the major retailers and told them that their stuff is contaminated, particularly in their private label section, and it might be a liability and they shouldn't be doing it. And so as a result, around 2020, 2021, during the pandemic, there's a lot of focus on everybody's waste at home, and they decided to go into compostable tableware. And because we were there kind of informing them of these cancer-causing chemicals in their products, we managed to secure several large deals to do the whole private label compostable sections with probably almost every major retailer in Canada, a bunch in the US. So chances are you've probably eaten off of a green-lid compostable plate or used their forks or knives. And as a result, we scaled very quickly overnight, and we got acquired in 2021. And so that was an adventure in itself. And I left being CEO January of 2023 to do some more innovative stuff.
It's a classic example of one of those overnight successes that we hear about, right? The 10-year overnight success.
Yeah, I would say bleeding edge until everybody orders too much all at one time.
So we know that sustainable alternatives exist for all sorts of environmentally horrifying single-use items. And I think I know the answer to this, but like, what holds that industry back? Why are we still so obsessed with single-use plastic?
I don't know. It's an interesting thing to, like, I know a little bit about the waste and how these things are processed. So I think it's something a little bit easier for the public to grasp. But I find some of the ways that we kind of handle these kind of single-use plastics, it's like the obvious things like, oh, the plastic grocery bags. And so everyone gets behind that. But if you look at a grocery store, we're still selling plastic bags on the shelf. If you look at muffin containers and everything else, it's like more plastic than ever before. Everything's individually wrapped in plastic. And interestingly enough, those reusable bags that we now buy at the grocery store are 100% made from polypropylene plastic. And the carbon footprint of those is pretty disastrous as well, because there's more material. They're all imported from overseas. And that's where these kind of like greenwash things happen in stores, and people try to do what's the public kind of wants, even if it sometimes isn't the most environmental things. What I can say from seeing on the inside of some of these major corporations and their private label departments and their sustainable departments is that they actually really do care about these things. And in the backside, they're doing some incredible things that are saving a lot more waste than things other than like plastic bags. But it's hard to communicate those in a meaningful way. But there's plenty of other places that can save a lot of waste rather than just our plastic bags, let's say, and cutlery.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. Do you find that possibly the cost associated with bringing these products to market is what's keeping the grocery stores, the Canadian Tires are staples, from still using plastic? We all try to be responsible, but is it the cost?
I think it comes down to the cost, and this was part of like a sell-in that the other aspect is the cost is so low because the scale of the industry. And I said, if I had the volume of all of your plastic forks and knives, I can be competitive too. But when I'm producing at like 0.25% the volume, it's hard to justify. If you're looking at the cost, and like no one ever goes there. And if you need plastic cutlery, let's say off a grocery store or like a Canadian Tire type shelf, if you don't have the option, if they don't put the option there, they can increase their revenue. People aren't going to be like, all of a sudden, I don't need these. And we don't have this pricing discrepancy where people have to make a choice, and like just make it for them and don't offer the other stuff.
Absolutely.
That's an interesting strategy. It's a good point.
And then I'm like, they're still going to buy their forks and knives. And I'm like, you're going to make more money off of this. We'll get to some sort of scale. And why leave it to a consumer to make the choice? Like, the grocery stores are making choices for us all the time on what they choose to put on their shelves. This can be another moment for buyers to make big impact. That's what I said. I'm like, for some of my things would be like, why are we all relying on everyone to make a small little impact? When I'm like, you can make one small choice and impact millions of kilos of plastic waste just by selecting what you put on the shelf. And that's just a small choice by one person.
It's a great opportunity and thought leadership for those retailers as well. And it sounds like through Greenlid, maybe they have taken a big step there, and perhaps they're not doing the best job communicating it.
Yeah, and it's just a touchy subject. It's where they have to be careful, I think, because it's in our 24-hour news cycle, and like how you promote some of these environmental things. As soon as you promote it, everyone's poking at it. So that's why a lot of these big changes they make are put behind the scenes, just because it's harder for people to understand, like when they change from like certain polypropylene plastics to PET plastics that are much more easily recycled. People just see plastic as plastic, but there's a huge difference, as polypropylene can't be really reused for food purposes, but PET plastic can be recycled again and again and again and come into food contact.
Do you think, we talk about the retailers having a role to play. Do you think the government has a more substantial role to play in enforcing adoption of environmentally responsible materials?
It's tough to say because I think it happens very slow. I do think regulations do help on the government level to at least force the hand of certain things, like but I think a lot of comes down to, again, the economics of it, but the regulations kind of can make it possible for someone like a Greenlid, when we're all thinking about single-use plastic bans, to kind of have a shot. Otherwise, the cost of changing what they're doing currently is high, because you have to take everything off the shelves. You don't know what the consumers are going to do if it's making a lot of money in that category. You don't mess with a good thing. I know internally, there's a lot of, let's say at a grocery store, a lot of the takeaway stuff like these at your delis and everything else, and all these back of house stuff, which actually is probably more than the people in the front making the choices have. And they can make a switch overnight. Like, I've spoken to them. It's just more, it's siloed in how their budgets are. So if you have a certain budget for all the kind of takeaway trays and things like that, you can't really make a change without someone saying, okay, this is just going to be an extra cost at the beginning. And so they just have to deal with budget. They're rewarded on how profitable their parts of the business are. And so unless there's kind of like a holistic reason, such as a government regulation coming down, it's really hard for them to do much, because they're driven by profit, and that's where their incentives lie.
Tracy, it's the almighty dollar again, isn't it?
It is. It always is. Like, I probably have used a lot of your products. Like, I bought the wooden spoons and stuff like that from Costco, so I have those. So obviously, as a consumer, we have to put our mind into the mindset of when to use and when not to use. And when it comes to garbage bags, I still don't use compostable garbage bags because, one, I've not seen them available. The bags that we get at the grocery store, definitely I don't see those anymore. I see now paper bags. Now, my question is that now that you're a seasoned entrepreneur, what is the next direction you're going to take?
Well, I think that's where it's kind of led me into the advanced biofiber area, where realizing that the shift to getting rid of those plastic bags, like you can fit a lot of plastic bags in a small like cubic meter compared to like paper bags or even these reusable plastic bags. And so there's a huge carbon footprint associated with that. And I know when everyone's switching over to look at paper bags, and we all think, oh, it's great to have paper bags. But the thing is, they look brown and you think they're recycled material. But the thing about recycling paper is the fibers get shorter and shorter over time. So for the most part, I tested a whole bunch for some big stores around like how far we could go with a recycled material. And really, like, you would be upset if you got anything below a 75% virgin or 25% recycled, because it would just break on you. And so we start cutting down more trees in order to do this. And so what I realized is, for a lot of these materials, there's also big supply chain considerations. So I kind of went back and started thinking about like, well, who's producing these reusable plastic bags? And also during the pandemic, when we all had these face masks and like everybody's single use kind of hospital gowns, they're made from 100% plastic. And the reason they're used is because they're easy in a manufacturing setting, because you actually melt all the seams. So there's no sewing. And that's a huge advantage for throughput. And that's why these are used. And I realized the paper is not going to be a solution here because we're cutting down more trees. It's always going to have to be pretty much close to 100% virgin if you want to put groceries in it. And they take up a huge amount of space and weight when you transport these. So with like transport costs, that needs to be factored in. And one area I'd realized and where we had success was kind of blending various materials and looking at kind of faster growing materials like hemp and wheat straw, like the kind of wheat straw that you see in like bales of hay on the fields after they kind of had the grain removed. And realized that we could kind of process this in a way and use a small amount of compostable plastic, because when you have 100% compostable plastic in this, it actually acts just like a plastic pretty much. Like there's not much advantage to it. So that's why you don't see like a 100% compostable plastic bags everywhere, because they're pretty much banned from the compost system and they're just more expensive and more carbon with them. But what I figured out with advanced biofibers is we might be able to blend these into kind of rolls of fabric, and then work backwards to knowing that all these machines exist out there for making face masks, for making gowns, for making these reusable plastic bags. So I started with, how do we make the material that fits that? Something that's like has a good tensile strength, something that could be heat bonded, like with the seams, and could kind of fit already into the existing machinery rather than come up with a material that doesn't fit the current system. And so developed with help, I guess, with Thrive Forward, actually, a grant which really made this kind of happen, produce a number of squares using mixes of hemp, flax, use some kind of wood fibers in it to make essentially these non-woven materials, same type of stuff that like wet wipes are made out of too. So, but it would be 100% natural material from natural sources, not from petroleum-based things like usual, and played around with like bonding temperatures and mixes and fiber lengths, and also how much compostable plastic we can put in there so that we could get the strength, the wet, and protect it from wetness as well as the bonding, and ended up actually producing some material on these large rolls and that can bond and have these type of strengths so that we can do it. And so that's really our next phase right now as we look to the future, is taking some of these learnings and scaling it up in a way that we're not an expensive way to do it, because things like hemp and wheat straw and flax can be fairly inexpensive. It's more about convincing these huge multinational non-woven roll makers to let us use a day to make a huge amount of it. But we've got some interest now that we've done some prototype rolls and things like that, and then we can just sell it to the front end people. We don't have to sell like the bags. We can do a little bit where we tell like the Loblaws and Sobeys and those folks about it, and then they can demand it from their manufacturers, and then we can supply the rolls. So we now have material that can do level 2 hospital gowns. It meets all the water resistant capabilities, the strength that bonds. And now we're just kind of playing around a little bit for the feel of it, so that it feels comfy when you're on it. But that's just a little thing. But practically we're there.
Morgan, there's a whole lot of good nuggets in there that I want to talk about, but we'd be here all day. Specifically, something that, and I have to give my wife credit for this, it's incredible how many fabric appearing items are made entirely from plastic. And I don't think that the consumer has any idea.
That's exactly it. Like, I think some of the major retailers, like when they first brought the reusable bags in, said like our non-plastic bags or something, like plastic-free reusable bags. And I'm like, these are 100% plastic. Like, how could you even have these signs? Because it just has that feeling. And there's tons and tons of products that are like that, but they can be replaced. It's just a price thing, and it does come down to scale as well. If I had the same type of orders from like all the major grocery stores for the reusable bags, I'm going to tell you I'll be pretty close to their cost, and the consumers are already forced to pay for these things already. So let's give them an actual kind of sustainable option if you're paying already for your kind of plastic sustainable option at the store.
You mentioned wet wipes, and it got me thinking. The reason I mentioned my wife is I would call her an anti-plastic warrior. We have an 18-month-old, so we're dealing with diapers and wipes and, you know, all of that stuff, the consumables that come along with having a baby or a toddler. And it's been tricky to find non-plastic consumables. And we have, but it costs a fortune, and that's, you know, that's not an economic reality for everyone. So I guess all to say is, you know, I just think there's just a huge opportunity in a business sense, in an environmental sense, and you know, probably more than we realize in a civilization sort of sense, to stop using these horrible materials, especially when we know there's alternatives.
Like, there's a company called Biofibre that I was first introduced to, and they have a pretty good material. It's just that pressure to change going through, and they're pretty close to the same cost. But like, again, it's the education by the consumers and not having the choice. But I have a 21-month-old and a 4-month-old as well, and I didn't realize the volume of wet wipes and diapers until then. And like the diapers are also all forms of like non-woven materials that are bonded as well. So I've met with some companies that have been trying to do some stuff on like the sanitary napkin space, and all of these materials, just from my own testing, I know that I can get the absorbent part, because I was looking at meat soaker pads as well for this material. All the parts of a diaper can be kind of switched out. It just becomes the cost and trying to figure out the supply chain, where you actually, if you start shifting supply chains around, the types of volumes that you need of this stuff can artificially like even increase an already expensive product if you don't have the supply of, let's say, a hemp or a wheat straw.
Do you want to talk about botanical symbiotics?
Yeah, botanical symbiotics is kind of an interesting one. I kind of partnered up with a professor out of Brock University to co-found the company. It's kind of looking at how we kind of increase the health of plants without like packing them full with chemical nitrogen-based fertilizers. So a lot of this type of thing about trying to increase soil health and in farms, the regenerative farming, a lot of it comes down to the microbes that are living in the soil. And it's, for instance, like that's why some of these regenerative farming techniques are about kind of like letting it grow a little bit, letting the roots go down and kind of bringing the microbes back in. And so it's pretty standard. Like a lot of people take probiotics and things for our human gut health. And we kind of, there's like a really strong feeling that our gut, well, this even comes from my PhD background. Like we were looking at how microbes basically can affect your human health with the molecules and the ways they interact with you. The same's true for plants. So they require some microbes to help, but for a symbiotic reason. So the microbes will kind of go onto the roots, and the plants give them a little bit of carbon from the sun and through sugars, and they help them uptake like essential like minerals and nutrients from the soil. And so they work really well together, and they're mycorrhizate type species, and they'd identified about 4 species that actually really significantly help plant growth, to the point where they are asking me to like help them maybe with some of the products. And so where you add these just sprinkled into your soil when you plant or around, and actually we've shown that they can actually they don't bond, but they associate with the roots and can get about 500 times more surface area of root, because you get so many little ones, extra roots coming out. It's pretty substantial when you pull the roots out, when you look at them growing with ours versus not. And this leads to like just better nutrition for the plants without having to like jam them full of nitrogen. So, or using like, they also are just healthier, so you don't need as many herbicides or pesticides kind of associated with them. And so I've been helping them kind of put a product together. You can see on the website, it's pretty fresh, botanicalsymbiotics.com. But we're going through some regulatory process, because it's interesting the amount of these regulations that can occur for some of these naturally occurring microbes to try to protect us from something that was already in the soil versus how easy it is for us just to go buy chemical fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides off the shelf. But we're kind of in that area where they treat us the same as like if we're a brand new chemical being added to the soil versus kind of a natural product. But I think it's going to take off. There's a lot of people interested in this kind of thing. And we've just seen such great real scientific results. It's not like kind of like hokey, like, oh yeah, just add this stuff to your soil. It's actually been proven out. And so we're just going through that process. We'll be launching in the US, I think in the next like month or so, and looking to see where we can go in Canada. Just Canada traditionally for everything is the regulatory is like 3 times as long and 10 times more the cost for a 10% of the market share compared to the US. So it's where, unfortunately, we have to start in the US because just the bureaucracy and cost is like becomes ridiculous to try to start in Canada first.
You know, having a strong support network. I have read that you were on Dragon's Den and you built your network of professionals, and you've gotten to know them. And does that play a role in helping you progress in what you're just trying to do right now with your products?
Yeah, tremendous, I think, experience from Greenlit. I forgot to even mention that. Yeah, we were on Dragon's Den before and did a deal with Dave Chilton, Arlene Dickinson, and so that they made some money for themselves after we exited, which was always a good thing. But certainly the network I made is very important. And I try to I've been through Next Canada, which I find is a really great accelerator program and a great network of people. And a lot of it is just staying in touch with folks over the last decade or so, because a lot of the people, if you're going through some of the programs that you guys have, the people that are in your kind of cohort, then eventually these people their businesses take off, and then all of a sudden they're in positions that can make difference. So I do find like I can make certain phone calls. I have lunch with Dave Chilton every few months as well still, and we talk about like new ideas. He and I actually going to be co-founding a company. I'm in the process of doing that. That's actually in a very cool renewable space that's just a little bit semi-stealth mode, but we're looking at a huge opportunity to make some large Canadian investments in infrastructure and in the waste management space. So you'll have to have me back on once we get that thing rolling, because I think it's going to be pretty exciting.
We've talked to a few companies now that are startups, and they're now going through the process of bringing their product to market. What kind of advice would you provide them?
Ask people for what you need. Sometimes, like let's say if you're doing a pitch or like you're having a conversation with like investors, or people aren't very specific, like you kind of give a talk about your stuff and you're like, I always ask after a chat, like, oh, like what would be ideal? Like, do you need to speak to like a buyer at this place? Like maybe I can like action that through my network, or versus kind of generalities. So like ask people for specific help if you think you can do it. Like, do you know anybody that think could help me in this? And then most people will say, oh, maybe this person, when they actually put to that kind of question. Or do you know anybody that like is in this field that can chat with me? Generally people help or should help everybody going there, but you have to kind of be specific in your asks. Sometimes it's hard to do that early on, but everybody loves helping other people, I hope.
That's an interesting piece of advice. I've found myself sort of, I suppose, accidentally in the business of putting together incubator and accelerator programs for various nonprofits and local governments and that sort of thing. And I get asked often, like, what really is the role of these programs and what's the value that they provide? And I think more than anything, it's that connection piece with other entrepreneurs, with potential funders, with specialists in the field, whatever it is. If you take someone with a good idea and sort of the technical or commercial know-how to make something of it, and you surround them with people who are willing to provide advice and connections and skill sets, that seems to be the sort of trigger to launching these businesses, more than sitting in a classroom and learning about value proposition. Like, sure, that stuff's important too, but it's not going to be what makes a difference.
No, yeah, that's like the general stuff. It's the connecting with the right people, because that can make a huge difference at various points and different things. And that's where like helping people all the time, and then like maybe in the future, like all of a sudden I'll be like, oh, this person might know someone over here. And so I'm always thinking around who do I know that like could help make this or provide some extra information. So like most of my days are trying to chat with people that know more than I do about things, and join in a mission or two, or interested. It's like Braden and I had a conversation a week or two ago just to catch up to see what's happening, because I think all of a sudden that's where a lot of impact can be made when we're kind of working together. I kind of believe in that kind of community thing, where if we're all in a neighborhood, we can probably do more so than if we were all like spread out and working on stuff. It's easier to like go down the street in a neighborhood and like build a playground for everyone than it is to probably go through a bureaucracy all separated to like get a playground fixed. So working together can probably really affect yourself and others much better.
No, I was just going to mention that the part that really builds on the entrepreneur is having a passion. And you're an outdoors person. Obviously, biodegradable products are probably something that you're very interested in, obviously, because you've designed your life around it. As an entrepreneur, you're putting so much effort into it that you should enjoy what you're doing.
Well, that's definitely it. I think enjoying as you're going along the journey. I mean, there's no such thing as the overnight success. So you kind of have to kind of move along and have fun while you're doing it. I get interested in a lot of different things, as you can tell, and I probably have to practice on like making sure I keep focused a little bit. But I kind of enjoy working with a lot of folks, because I had been the entrepreneur residence big master. I've mentor and advised people with people need stuff, I'll chat with them as much as they need, because it's kind of that's the fun part. The fun part isn't like, oh, getting a big order and fulfilling it, or getting some big sale. Like that's part of it. Like that's a little bit of a high, but I think the longer you kind of keep going at it, the more people you have, the easier it gets, the more fun it is. I think not to get frustrated if things aren't going well after a few years, and you'll eventually get through it. The outcome isn't about like kind of like the end state of being like super successful. That will come if you're kind of enjoying what you're doing, because you'll just work harder at it, and it's not work.
Tracy, that seems like some wise words to wrap up this conversation on. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. Morgan, thanks so much for joining us today. And you've got a lot of things going on, and it seems like they're all kind of sort of in that realm of sustainability, which is really important. We see the world changing at a rapid pace here, and it's good to know that there are smart folks working together to try and right some of the environmental wrongs that we may have done as a society.
Yeah, hopefully we can, and when we do, to try to right them, that we don't create other ones in the process. There's a lot of thought as we go forward to think downstream, I think, in the full circular economy way, because sometimes, as I said, thinking about the plastic bag over here, the downstream results are like cutting down more trees and shipping heavier products all around.
Yep, absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Morgan.
We'll be right back after this short break.
Strike Up is Canada's leading digital conference for women entrepreneurs, providing a forum for growth, mentorship, and funding. Learn more at strikeup.ca.
We return to the Frontier Entrepreneurship Podcast with co-hosts Braden Kemp and Tracy Morningstar.
Tracy, I think Morgan must have invented some sort of a time travel device, because I can't imagine not only being involved in so many different ventures, but also being as effective and successful as he is. And I think what I found most impactful, at least personally from that conversation, was how important it is to find people who have knowledge and connections in the space you're working in and ask for their help, which is, something that entrepreneurs aren't always known for, admitting what they don't know. But it seems like Morgan certainly understands the importance of building a community around yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I also got from talking with Morgan today, is thoughtfulness and his ability to bring something to market. Now, as an entrepreneur, yes, you start on your journey, you bring it. He's very thoughtful in terms of the product that he has, and that he doesn't want to further disrupt nature. I love that he said that, because that to me is trust in the entrepreneur, trust that what they're bringing to market is something that is genuine and something that I look forward to purchasing.
Yeah, it's, you make a good point with the word trust. I think as consumers, we often probably have more trust than we should in the people and companies that are selling us products. But in the case of Morgan Wyatt, I think I would trust any of his companies to sell me a good quality and sustainable product. Tracy, I want to thank you, and I want to thank Morgan Wyatt again it's a really insightful conversation. And we'll see you next time on the Frontier Entrepreneurship Podcast.
Next time on the Frontier Entrepreneurship Podcast, Tracy and Braden get up at the crack of dawn to see how dairy farmers in Canada are digitally transforming their operations with new tech. Join us in conversation with Dr. Sherry Vandepaul, CEO of Catalytics. This edition of the Frontier Entrepreneurship Podcast was made possible with the support of FedDev Ontario and the Government of Canada. The executive producer is Robert Washburn. I'm John Hayden. To find out more, head to our website, nventure.ca. Thanks for listening.